There's absolutely nothing worse than experiencing burnout. It can be categorized by complete and utter exhaustion, fatigue, depression, anxiety, and even overwhelm. The question is, why does it happen and how can we short circuit this response? Let's take a look. Burnout can stop you in your tracks and totally upend any type of goal that you're looking to achieve in the moment. In my 90-day mission to become unstoppable for my upcoming book called The Identity Gap, one of the biggest findings I discovered was that when our fight and flight mechanisms are repeatedly triggered, it tends to create certain behavioral changes in us, spontaneous behavioral changes, that do nothing to help us reach our end goals. If this response isn't turned off, then it remains stuck on, and for a large percentage of the population, it's remaining on for far too long, especially any kind of pressures that are sitting in the background, in the back of your mind, and that could be an underlying financial pressure. But if it remains stuck on for too long, we experience very real physiological symptoms from that. Because the reality is, you cannot pay a high psychological price without paying a high biological price in the background. It can lead to very real nutritional deficiencies that they in themselves can also once again loop around and continue to affect our behavior and our cognition. If the nutritional deficiencies kick in, that, if it's anything from vitamin D, iodine, magnesium, can result in everything from anxiety, depression, to overwhelm, and of course, complete and utter burnout. If this is the case, we experience a feedback loop. So we need to short circuit this feedback loop to resolve the current burnout and to prevent it from happening in the future. And here's how I look at burnout. If you're putting in a massive amount of energy to reach your goal, but you don't have the full energetic resources to meet the demands of that goal, you have what is a deficit. And think of it like a credit card. You take out a credit card with a certain amount on it, but every single month you have to pay interest on that credit card. Now, that interest is actually the physiological expense that you must pay for that psychological output. And that keeps on accruing in the background. And it can get to the point where it accrues so much that you simply can't handle it and you have to take out another loan to cover the entire amount and clear it all together. So if you're currently hustling your ass off right now, but you're not resting and recuperating to balance out any nutritional deficiencies that have been experienced through that burnout, we must address the interest that needs to be paid. And there's a few different ways that you can do this. The first one is to work out what is firing your fight or flight response so much that it's leading to burnout. Is it work? Is it relationship? Is it finance? Is it a combination of all of them? When we look at a particular one that's pressing on your mind right now, and we try and neutralize your response, so when you think of it the next time you don't go into fight or flight, you suddenly alleviate that psychological and biological price that you've been paying towards it. And there's a few different ways that you can do this. Some are more difficult than others. The first step is to interrupt the pattern. If you're in a work environment, for example, and your boss comes along and that stresses you out, after that experience has occurred, we need to do a pattern interrupt or create a state change. That could be everything from standing up, moving around, to putting your headphones in and playing some music from back in the day when you were confident and free of all of these worries. Now, the great thing with music is that it can anchor you to a past identity in which you were steeped with confidence, you had energy, you knew what you were doing, and you could just drive yourself forward without the stress. This can help to turn the fight or flight response off. Now, this comes with a caveat. When you're in your fight or flight response and you're in it deep, it can be hard to make that rational, logical choice to move yourself out of it. So the first couple of times you do it, it is going to be more difficult. And it's going to be more difficult for a couple of reasons. One, you have a habitual response to that stimulus right now. It's easier for your brain to go down that path because it uses less energy. If you were to navigate to a new response where you didn't react that way or go into fight or flight, it's like needing a GPS to travel a new path. It's unknown to you, so it requires more processing energy for your brain as a whole. So initially, you're going to start going down this path until you do the pattern interrupt with the music and you can start going down this other way. The other thing that we also have to understand is let's look after ourselves. At the end of the day, we can experience what is known as decision fatigue. So decision fatigue is the point where your brain just simply can't make any more decisions. So the brain does one of two things when it hits decision fatigue. One is to do nothing, and the second one is it fails to assess the consequences adequately of your next steps. And that is where we go down the old worn pathway instead of the new pathway as well. When we realize we've hit decision fatigue, we can take the pressure off our shoulders and relax and understand, hey, I'm in that place where I can't make any decisions right now. I just need to let this play out. I'll put some music on in the background. It may not be as effective, but it might help some kind of change in the future. The one thing I love about using music as a pattern interrupt is because when we heard that music at the time that we absolutely loved it, it really creates a template for our brain to revisit in the past that we've been repeatedly before. So it's really reminding ourselves of who we can be in that fun, loving and caring state. And that can switch off fight or flight. The second thing that you can do to switch off fight or flight is to check out some of the latest wearable devices. Now in the last video, I introduced you guys to what are known as the touch points. So these are the devices on my wrist right now. What they do is they provide bilateral stimulation, so it's tactile stimulation, and they vibrate between the wrists in sync with each other. You control it with the app and you can turn up the intensity or turn it down. What this does is it helps to rewire new neurological pathways to the preferred response to that event that would typically stress you out. And it can work in under 30 seconds. And it's as simple as turning them on before you believe you're going to have a negative response, or turning them on once you realize you're having a negative response. These have been incredibly effective. In fact, unfortunately, one of my friends had to go to the emergency room a week ago. I put these on him before we went to the emergency room. He was full of adrenaline, full of anxiety, fidgeting, biting his cheek. Within a couple of minutes, he had completely calmed down and was joking as if nothing had even happened. This is a very real, not just behavioral response, but physiological response too. So with this type of stimulation, it's helping to alleviate the real physiological responses that we have when we're stressed out. So it calms down any tightness in the chest, tightness in the shoulders, and just relaxes your body as a whole. Once we have that physiological release, then the brain typically follows after that. They've been used for everything from ADHD, autism, PTSD. So anything in which stress can trigger and heighten those particular challenges that individuals face. One thing I have found is that they do create spontaneous behavior change. Because you're turning the fight or flight mechanism off and you're going back into the logic rational mind, you can get a lot more done in a lot less time. And finally, you need to pay the interest that you've accrued during your burnout. And you can do this by going to a functional doctor. So a functional doctor looks at your whole entire body. A GP looks at one part of the body and may send you off to a specialist. So the functional doctor looks at how everything works in conjunction with the other. And you want to get them to test you for any nutritional deficiencies that you may have accrued through interest during this burnout phase. And this could be everything from vitamin D, B, iodine, magnesium, some of which a large percentage of the population are nutritionally deficient in. Now, you might be thinking, I eat really well, but I'm still burning out. Well, that's more common than not. And here's why. Our farming practices have changed significantly. The same level of nutrients in broccoli 50 years ago to what's in it now are completely different. And in fact, it's dropped so much that we do require some supplementation to fill that gap. Once we begin to correct these deficiencies, not only do you get your cognition back, but it's easier to stay in the logic, rational mind more often. Now, the thing about deficiencies is it can send you into fight or flight and survival mode because the brain is simply not getting the resources that it needs to process the information of the world around us. It's like when you get food cravings. Fight or flight can also come on in that instance because your body needs energy for all of your biological functions. If you start to run out of energy, then you're going to start to potentially panic. Your focus is going to narrow. You're going to have that hit of adrenaline and cortisol. So you're going to fight to find the nutrients that you need to keep living and to keep your body functioning how it should. To recap, number one, work out what are these triggers for you turning your fight and flight on too often and not being able to rest and recover from it. Number two, work out what your pattern interrupt is, whether it be something like the touch points or music, for example. And number three, pay your interest. If you found this information incredibly useful, be sure to subscribe, like, and please leave a comment about your experience with burnout. I'd love to hear more. And head over to theidentitygap.co to learn more about my upcoming book that will be released through Entrepreneur Magazine and Entrepreneur Press in October of this year. Can't wait to share it with you. In the meantime, have a great week and be sure to look after yourself. You deserve it. You also need it. Take care.